Are you obsessed with learning about history?
Who is that?
Are you tired of people constantly making fun of you and calling you lame?
Yeah.
Well, show them up by traveling back in time. GAG Tours offers the life-changing chance to experience history being made all around you. Our most popular tour option is the New Deal trip, in which you will travel back to the time of FDR, the end of Prohibition, and the Great Depression. Exciting! As Gertrude and John Von Dunn Southworth once said in their book, The New Deal, An Impartial History of the Roosevelt Administration. In a game of cards, a new deal means the gathering up of every player's cards and the dealing out of new hands. So take a gamble, pun intended, and don't just learn about history and be lame. Live it with GAG Tours.
This trip will cover many of the end destinations of the 1930s. It may not be the Roaring Twenties, but it ain't no snooze fest. Dine with some of America's finest. Tour the hottest locations when they first opened, and be part of the political spirit of the 1930s. So come one, come all, for this is something you definitely don't want to miss.
Roosevelt declares a 4-day national bank holiday on his first day in office, and in this interim period creates the Emergency Banking Relief Bill for Congress. On March 9th, Congress begins a special session, which is now known as the first 100 days. During this time, 15 important pieces of legislation are passed, which encompass the first New Deal. The laws passed regulate labor, agriculture, the environment, and business, as well as industrial recovery, relief, and reform. The Agricultural Adjustment Act, for example, provides subsidies for farmers, whose stock market crash hit hard as they never fully adjusted to a peacetime economy after World War I. The Public Works Administration creates projects such as the New York Triborough Bridge and hires private construction companies, further stimulating the economy. The Tennessee Valley Act commissions the construction of dams in the Tennessee Valley to provide electricity to rural areas. The Emergency Bank Relief Act reopens banks that were forced closed during the Depression.
Speaking of the Emergency Banking Relief Act, in order to restore Americans' faith in the very banks that had closed on them, Roosevelt held a radio broadcast to convince the public on the night of March 12, 1933. The overwhelming popularity and success of this first broadcast leads to a string of others throughout his presidency. These fireside chats, the term coined by Harry Butcher of CBS, allowed the ordinary American to hear directly from the president, who used informal terms like my friends and I in order to minimize the estranging gap between the president and the people.
My friends, I want to talk for a few minutes with the people of the United States about banking. To talk with the comparatively few who understand the mechanics of banking, but more particularly with the overwhelming majority of you who use banks for the making of deposits and the drawing of checks.
Fireside chats instilled a massive trust in the government by the people by offering them a sense of what the government's aim was and exactly what their role would be in amending the country's economic state. In return, viewers were replenished with a brand new sense of confidence in their government, one that had been lost in the time of Herbert Hoover and the Great Depression.
Other than during these fireside chats, the country truly felt Roosevelt was a friend when his legislation followed popular belief and sympathized with American families. Nationwide, prohibition was growing to be a prevalent issue as families yearned for the alcoholic beverages they were restricted from accessing due to the 18th Amendment of 1920. Our tour will take you to a facetious setting, the House of Senate on March 22nd of 1933, a day in which part of Congress decided to take action against the outlawing of alcohol consumption. The House of Representatives collaborated to fight the 18th Amendment by barging into senatorial chambers with anti-prohibition signs, all while chanting, "Vote, vote, we want beer." This particular event greatly influenced the passing of the 21st Amendment in December of the same year, which reduced the crime rate associated with the surreptitious smuggling of beer by nullifying prohibition entirely.
On March 31st, less than a month after Roosevelt was inaugurated into office, a movie called Gabriel Over the White House was released. This movie features a fictional U.S. President Hammond, who is described as a do-nothing crook in the beginning, based on President Hoover. After a near-fatal car accident and a coma, Hammond's political beliefs changed drastically, making him very similar to Roosevelt. President Hammond rids his cabinet of people he considers big business lackeys, and is soon impeached by Congress. He then dissolves the legislative branch and assumes lawmaking power, becoming an all-powerful dictator. Though he suppresses the First Amendment and completely revokes the Constitution, Hammond is revered as the hero and not the villain of the movie. This film prepares the American people for a presidency that would nearly be a dictatorship. Roosevelt himself reads the scripts and provides the director and producers with numerous script changes in order to create the perfect way to introduce this idea to the masses, while also creating a sort of instructional guide for himself.
The Civilian Conservation Corps, created under the Emergency Conservation Work Act, was founded in 1933 as one of the initial parts of the New Deal. This administration provides job opportunities to unemployed, unmarried men between the ages of 18 to 23 to work towards the conservation effort. This age limit is later extended to 17 to 28, and the CCC also expands to employing women. It did, however, operate separate programs for Native Americans and veterans. These young men worked around 40 hours a week and made $1 a day. Out of the $30 they made in a month, these men and women sent between $22 and $25 back home. Over the 9 years the CCC is active, 3 billion trees are planted and more than 800 parks nationwide are constructed.
In order to amend the industrial and labor issues hindering the country's workforce, FDR's administration created the NRA, or the National Recovery Administration, not to be confused with the National Rifle Association. It was one of the more prominent 100 Days regiments and succeeded in bringing about the NIRA, the National Industrial Recovery Act, to create fair competition and coerce businesses who cooperate with each other. The NRA's insignia was a blue eagle, which companies that supported its cause displayed on their buildings. Much of their work was accomplished by rallies and parades. Our tour will take you to one such parade.
November 11, 1933, it all started. The Black Blizzard was the first of many dust storms that devastated the Midwest, going as far as north as Canada. It covered this area in sand drifts more than 6 feet high and destroyed farmland. This period of sandstorms, nicknamed the Dust Bowl, was the worst drought in American history, and it contributed to causing the Great Depression. Many tenant farmers were forced to abandon their farms and move to the West Coast, searching for jobs that consisted mostly of cheap labor.
While Central Park itself had been established in New York City in 1857, the zoo portion was founded in 1934 under the Works Progress Administration. Prior to its creation, the zoo was composed of donated animals, including swans and bear cubs, which weren't housed in proper enclosures. This new zoo was made up of red brickwork buildings in which animals were housed. The Central Park Zoo was created under the Department of Parks and Recreation and set the standard for other future zoos.
The creation funded by the Civil Works Administration of the Public Works of Art project during the New Deal brought jobs to nearly 4,000 artists of various mediums, from murals to sculptures. These artists were all commissioned by this project not only to create jobs for the unemployed during the Great Depression, but also to capture 1930s American life and culture. The Coit Tower, established in 1933 on Telegraph Hill in San Francisco, is where many of the murals made under this project are hung and displayed for all to see. Here you will be able to view many famous works including Banking and Law, painted by George Albert Harris. A large portion of the works depict Californian life during the Depression, while others cover controversial social issues. Around 1935, the Public Works of Art project curtailed, and many of the works were passed on to the Works Progress Administration.
Again created another important piece of history that we still use today. The Boulder Dam, now known as the Hoover Dam, was completed in the fall of 1935. At nearly 400 meters long, it became the largest hydroelectric energy producer in the U.S. On September 30th, 1935, Franklin D. Roosevelt held a ceremony which was attended by more than 12,000 people. In this ceremony, he dedicated the dam to Boulder City, naming it Boulder Dam. However, 12 years later, the name was changed to Hoover Dam in order to commemorate Hoover for his efforts on the project, as plans for it began during his administration.
The Living Newspaper was a form of theater that presented the news and urged social action. These originated in Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution. Living newspapers produced in America were federally funded under the Federal Theater Project under the Works Progress Administration. One of the more famous living newspapers is the AAA Plowed Under, which we will be seeing a production of on our trip. This was a play that dramatized the troubles of the farmers during the Dust Bowl and urged that farmers should unite to cut out the middlemen. AAA Plowed Under is the first uncensored living newspaper, as it puts down the Agricultural Adjustment Act, hence the AAA part of the name.
During the Depression, American workers continued to organize and fight for labor rights. Many employers, however, refused to recognize unions. This tension between laborers and their employers continued throughout the New Deal era. The decisive labor conflict came at the end of 1936, organized by the United Auto Workers, or the UAW. This union demanded recognition from GM, Chrysler, and Ford, and when GM refused, the UAW responded with the creation of the sit-down strike. On this trip, we will take you back to December 30th, 1936, when auto workers at the Fisher Body plant in Flint, Michigan, held a strike inside the factory by locking themselves in and refusing to leave the building. This tactic successfully immobilized part of GM's production system. GM tried to force the workers out by turning off the heat, and when that didn't work, the police were called in to put down the strike. The auto workers held their ground, and the police were unable to put down the strike. This strike tactic moved to surrounding plants, and after 44 days, GM agreed to recognize the UAW.
Next, we will take you back to January 20th, 1937, the day of FDR's second inauguration. Roosevelt was the first president to be inaugurated on this day, as it is the first inauguration to take place after the passing of the 20th Amendment as president. In his inaugural address, FDR elaborates on his plans to expand the role of the government in the lives of Americans. He stated, "We refuse to leave the problems of our common welfare to be solved by the winds of chance and the hurricanes of disaster." During the Second New Deal, which had just begun before the speech, he does exactly this. The government became more and more a part of everyday life as it started funding various arts and public works projects, like the FMP and the FTP.
This is preeminently the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly. Nor need we shrink from honestly facing conditions in our country today. This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper.
Completed in 1937, the Golden Gate Bridge was opened for vehicular traffic in May of that year. The invention of engineer and poet Joseph Strauss, the idea of building a bridge in this area had been floating around for a while. Strauss spent more than a decade trying to gain support for the building of the Golden Gate Bridge. Construction began in 1933 and continued for the next 4 years. WPA aided in the later years of the construction of the bridge, and also helped with the maintenance and the building of roads around the bridge, such as Lion Street. On Pedestrian Day, when it first opened to the public, 18,000 people waited for the signal of a foghorn and became the first group of pedestrians to cross it and make history. You will be able to join this group and watch records being made, such as Florentine Callegari's record of being the first person to cross the bridge on stilts.
Projects that came about under the WPA and the Second New Deal. They employ musicians, conductors, and composers during this time period, while also hosting concerts, music festivals, and offering music classes. On our New Deal trip, we will be visiting one of these concerts, known as the Midsummer Night Symphony. Every Tuesday to Friday between July 11th and August 11th of 1937, the San Diego Symphony Association put on a beautiful show at the Ford Bowl in Balboa Park. The FMP, like the Second New Deal overall, puts an emphasis on the arts and helps employ artistic American citizens.
Of the various events we take you to, the opening of the Department of the Interior Museum in 1938 is a favorite among previous tour goers. The Interior Museum in Washington, D.C. was created under the authority of Harold Ickes, Secretary of the Interior. The purpose of its creation was to educate visitors on the mission of this particular department, with the intent of convincing more taxpayers to bestow their trust to the federal government. This museum, which still happens to be around today, was a big success around the time of its commencement. Here you will be able to enjoy the exclusive pre-opening party where Harold Ickes himself will be welcoming guests, and make history as one of the first to tour the 95 exhibits of the Interior Museum.
Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration was well known for their incorporation of African Americans into Congress. Titled the Black Cabinet, a group of African American bureaucrats met at the home of Mary McLeod Bethune, Director of the Division of Negro Affairs, simply to discuss matters concerning the nation and African American rights. This group reported directly to the President and advised him on how to handle Negro affairs, including employment and education for African Americans. By going on our trip, we will receive the chance to witness one of these significant meetings in person and learn about African American issues like their employment from the very people who aim to solve them.
On Easter Sunday of 1939, talented African-American soprano Marian Anderson was ready to perform at her scheduled concert in Constitution Hall on the last day of her global tour. Only one problem. The Daughters of the American Revolution restricted Marian Anderson from performing there, simply because of her race. They didn't want an African American woman to perform there, especially since the concert hall was exclusive to white artists only. Marian Anderson had represented her country globally, but was denied from doing so in one of its most prominent buildings. However, Eleanor Roosevelt, distinguished First Lady, arranged a separate concert for her later and wrote to the Daughters of the Revolution that their organization has failed to enlighten the American people. Marian Anderson sang beautifully on her rescheduled concert at the Lincoln Memorial, and we hope you will enjoy her concert as much as everyone else did. Her courageous performance on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial made history as a milestone in the struggle for racial equality.
Genius draws no color line. And so it is fitting that Marian Anderson should raise her voice in tribute to the noble Lincoln whom mankind will ever honor. Miss Marian Anderson.
We hope you enjoyed the presentation of our trip, which highlights the exciting and important events of the New Deal. GAG Tours would like to thank Mr. Martinez for allowing us to use his one-of-kind time machine. For further information about our trip, please contact us at 555 New Deal or at www.gagtourcompany.com. Your return to the present time period is not guaranteed. GAG Tours will not be held responsible if you contract polio while on the trip and need to be left in the time of the New Deal to prevent contamination of other fellow passengers or our present time period.